Now with all that budget news, joining us to hopefully reduce Kizungu Mingi, as we heard from one of you this evening, is the Treasury PS, Dr. Kamau Thugge, joining us in studio.
Thank you.
Karibu sana. Nice. Thank you. Congratulations. I'm sure it was quite a big day for you. What would you say the overarching goal of the budget was, and what should Kenyans be most proud of in it?
Yeah, let me just first start by saying putting together this budget was not easy. On the one hand, we wanted to reduce the fiscal deficit. Last year, 16-17, our deficit was about 9.1%. This year, we have tried to reduce it to 7.2%, notwithstanding the fact that we had a lot of expenditures related to the elections last year as well as the drought. But we've been able to manage to reduce that deficit to 7.2. For 18-19, we wanted to further reduce the deficit to 5.7. At the same time, we had all these additional goals and the big four that we needed to start funding. And it's not that we wanted to raise revenue significantly. And so what that meant is that we had to really prioritize our expenditures. And indeed, we did. For the first time, we did what we call a zero-based budgeting, where we looked at expenditures of each ministry, line by line, and cut whatever was a non-priority expenditure and move those savings to fund the big four.
Okay.
But before I go further, let me also just give you maybe a bit of a background, just to give the context for the budget. When the Jubilee government came into power, we had a lot of constraints for growth. Yes, we had done quite well, but the growth was actually starting to decelerate. And so we came up with an economic transformative plan. It had 5 pillars. Maybe I can go into them later, but we have 5 pillars. And the idea was to try to implement those pillars and try to get the economy to grow and to create jobs. After the first 5 years, we actually were very successful. The economy had been growing by about 5.6%. This was the highest growth over a period of 5 years for a long time, maybe even since the 1970s. And so we made a lot of gains. On the infrastructure side, we did the railway, we did roads, we did ports, we did energy, as you mentioned earlier. We did a lot on the social welfare side, and of course we implemented the devolution, which was, I think, quite a major success. So we are coming from a situation where we think we have done quite well, but we can do much better.
Okay.
And so this, the big four, is really now to move us to the next stage of growth and to increase employment and wealth creation. And so this budget of today is sort of the transition between that plan and the big four.
Fair enough, and let's go into that in detail, and we'll speak more, especially when you talk about what you've been able to do in your deficit later. But I want to start with big four, as you've mentioned, healthcare. You know, there's the general feeling that we are spending more in our health plans in terms of curing than preventing. Would you agree, and why is that the case?
Well, of course, as you know, health is now a devolved function. And so even at the national level, what we are really dealing with is more on the policy side. The implementation is actually at the county level. But I do believe, at least from the plans that we now have and what is now in the big four, it is really about moving to, first of all, improving the infrastructure for health, and of course also the personnel, but also trying to move in a situation where we are able to provide health services ultimately to most Kenyans. At the moment, I think we are having the National Hospital Insurance Fund covers about 36%. And so all this, the expenditures that you had today for health, the taxation measures that you had that will go to the health sector, they're all designed to move into that direction.
Is it not unjustified that while we have successfully allocated billions to the health sector, that in terms of performance, Kenyans are still dying from very preventable and mundane diseases. And what is your perspective in terms of performance then, or the good use of that money? Malaria is still a big killer. Cholera is still killing. I mean, and all sorts of other diseases in 2018.
Well, from another perspective, I think if you look at some of the health indicators, there have been quite a significant improvement over the last 5 years. Maternal health has improved significantly. So I think there are fewer mothers that are dying. There are fewer children that are dying. And so it may be that some indicators have deteriorated, but I would imagine that overall that the health sector, given the amount of money that we have put in, has improved.
You've created, or rather the Treasury has created in this instance, a cancer institute that is being set up separate from other existing research facilities, and throughout the budget there appears to be a kind of duplication of this role. So, I mean, how do you justify that when we have institutions like KEMRI or even our local universities that could be strengthened to fit that role? Why remove cancer specifically?
Yeah, of course it's important that you understand that the Treasury does not set up institutions. These institutions...
Rather, you're funding it.
We're funding it, and I'm sure there's a good reason why it's being funded. The Ministry of Health has looked at it and feels there's a gap in the health sector for this particular institution. And I think they've been able to persuade us that indeed that this is a necessary institution.
What persuades you that it is better to fund that than to inject more money into institutions like KEMRI and universities?
Because already we are pumping money into those. I think we have to be able to chew and walk at the same time. We fund those, but we also fund where we find that there's a gap in a particular sector.
All right, and similarly, those, because you said they do justify this to you, I mean, what is your rationale in terms of creating such a center vis-a-vis more focus on our biggest killers, pneumonia, malaria, HIV and AIDS growing?
As I said, I mean, obviously, we even in those for those diseases, we have put a lot of money on those. Some of it is from GOK, from the government, and some of it is from donors. So I think we are able to fund those. Plus, where there's a gap that arises, I think we should be able to do both fundings.
What would you say the cost implication is regarding the Cuban doctors, and how does that compare to our local doctors?
Well, so far we have, for the fiscal year 18-19, we have budgeted 1 billion for the Cuban doctors. And again, there's a gap in that particular sector for those specialized personnels. And so I think, and it may not just be the health sector that we would need to get qualified personnel or skills that are missing from here and bring it to help us achieve the big four. So I see it as a way going forward where we identify, here's a gap, we can get support from so-and-so, let's get that support and let's achieve our objectives.
In terms of justifying that these are gaps in the health sector, and then that cost then is necessary compared to whatever could have gone to increasing our own local capacity, who foots that bill at the end of the day? County governments? That 1 billion?
No, that is the national government.
Okay.
That's budgeted at the national government. Obviously for the county governments, we have a lot of conditional transfers on the health. We do have the maternal health. We have the medical equipment services that we provide to county governments. And of course now we also have the CT scans for cancer scanning, and that we have budgeted some 7 billion. So even as we get this additional technical support, we're also moving forward and funding counties with our resources.
Fine. Let's move quickly to agriculture, and briefly, I mean, can we justify the billions that are being spent there, especially in irrigation, when we don't seem to have the evidence that that money has resulted in food security, because we're still importing, be it maize, be it sugar, and frankly, you know, dismal performance from irrigation schemes like Galana Kolalu.
Well, you know, the agricultural sector has been doing quite well. If you look at the last 5 years, the agricultural sector has been growing by 5%, and that is what has actually have been driving the economy. It is only last year when we had a drought, when it decelerated to maybe about 1.5, 1.6%. So I think there are some things that we are doing that are good in the agricultural sector.
But what would you say the lessons are from Galana Kolalu to justify, you know, increasing the acreage under irrigation?
Well, of course, under Galana, we started off with a pilot program. That's what I think was 10,000 acres. That was the pilot, to basically find out what is the best thing to do and which seeds are the best. It's an ongoing process. But the fact that that has maybe did not achieve the objectives, the full objectives that we had anticipated, it doesn't mean that we can't do other things in irrigation.
It's true, but I suppose the counter is that people find it to be a bit of a white elephant, if you like, in performance. If
you look at the budget that we submitted today, you will see we've put a lot of money on irrigation, not necessarily in Galana Kolalu, but in other irrigation schemes. And I think if we are to move towards having a sustainable agricultural sector and to reduce our dependence on rain, then I think the expenditures and the policies that we are taking in the agricultural sector are actually in the right direction.
Let's talk about debt. How does the government justify its current debt levels? I mean, revenue is 1.9 trillion, our debt 4.8 trillion. Many feel that the argument you're making on GDP does not hold. The basic principle of debt is that you're able to pay it, you can afford it from what you're earning, and that is not the case.
Well, that is the case. We are producing enough to be able to pay the debt. But let me just step back a little bit and talk about this debt. What is this debt? Because we have the SGR. We have the SGR. SGR is debt. Now we can argue about whether it was necessary to have SGR, but in my view, it was necessary to have the SGR.
But its cost to 4.8 trillion is just a.
I'm getting to it, you know, and so the debt that we have acquired is for productive projects. Yeah, whether it is at the port, whether it's the electricity that we are now generating, it is linked to development expenditures. And therefore, debt is not a bad thing if it is being used for development expenditures. Yeah. Now, if you look at the debt that we have accumulated, even if you look at the last, let's say 5 years, yeah, because right now, our debt is roughly, at least in net present value terms, is about 50% of GDP. Yeah. If you compare where we were 5 years ago, and you look at all these sub-Saharan African countries, you'll find that we have accumulated debt at a slower pace than most sub-Saharan African countries. Yeah, and so and when we look at whether we have a sustainable debt position, there are two things that we look at: whether we are insolvent, or the cash, whether we have a cash flow problem. And under any of the measures that are looked at to judge whether you have a sustainable debt position, we are very, very far away from those thresholds.
PS, yet World Bank, IMF, CBK, local experts all disagree. Unfortunately, I am told I absolutely do not have time to indulge you further.
Let me just finish on that one, because they don't disagree. What they say...
But they do.
No, they don't. And let me clarify. What they say is that if, as I said earlier, we had a higher budget deficit. Now we are reducing it. Yeah. What they were saying is, if we don't take steps to reduce that fiscal deficit, then we will run into a debt problem. But we are not doing that. We are reducing the debt. Already we are in a sustainable position. So therefore, we are actually strengthening our debt, external debt sustainability and position.
This, you must agree to come back on the program so that we can continue this discussion. Can I hold you to it?
Thank you.
Can I?
Yes.
All right. I wasn't going to let go of your hand. We're going to have our own handshake here. Right. Thank you, though, for your time, Treasury PS, Dr. Thugge. And we must take a break. We're back with more after this. Stay with us.